Good evening, everybody. I am your host, Jack Remington, the Jack Remington Political Analyst Channel. Very disturbing events taking place with our neighbors up north, the great nation of Canada. It's my third favorite country. You know, the United States is my favorite country. The nation of France, Napoleon Bonaparte's country, is my second favorite country. They speak French, right? Well, in Canada, the province of Quebec is a French-speaking province. Even 3,000 miles away to the west of Quebec, there's still English and French signs in British Columbia and Yukon territories. I've only been to Canada 3 times. That's not the point of this video. This is not about me. This is about the truckers. Those of you who know me and follow my channel know that I'm going to back the truckers. Why? Because they're trucking for freedom. They're doing a friendly, peaceful protest, and they have resisted all bait, all harassment. They sold their diesel truck out of their back of their vans, hoping to escalate some violence. That's why they really did it. Didn't work. A couple of them yelled at the police. I got that on video, and if I get around to it, I'll put that up here. But there was no violence. And, of course, the false flags, the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Company, well, they're violent insurrectionists. And where we've been hearing that since January 6th of last year. And they're going to try to make it stick. But a couple of funny things happened on the way to our current situation. February 15th, 2022, my time flies by. Pepsi. So cream soda. It's pretty good. And I'm learning French, but my French is terrible. But my French is better than my Spanish, though. And it's better than my Russian. And better than my Japanese. So having said that, how did we get here? Why am I making this video? Well, people are trying to paint this Justin Trudeau, who was the son of the other Prime Minister of Canada many, many years ago, Pierre Trudeau. Now, Pierre Trudeau had to invoke the Emergency War Act because there was a horrible, and they were white people, by the way, the FLQ, they were called the Front de Libération du Québec, and the FLQ for short. So I'll be saying FLQ, which means these people. They formed in late 1962, and they were French-speaking, and they were upset that the British control Canada. They were trying to start a civil war or take over the province of Quebec, make it its own country. They did have a unintended benefit, nefarious criminal misdeeds. Well, we'll get to that later if I can remember squeezing this. I'm going to keep this video short, try to keep it under 15 minutes. I haven't done much research, so if it seems a little haphazard, bear with me. But I do have a great point to make here. This FLQ actually got so much support from the Liberation du Québec. The FLQ was a militant Quebec separatist group. Their aim was establishing independent and socialist Quebec through violent means. Of course, the FLQ was considered a terrorist group by the Canadian government, and rightfully so. And that is not in dispute with anybody. In the early 1960s, there was some dispute with that, mostly from liberals in Canada. They conducted a number of attacks between 1963 and 1970, which totaled over 160 violent incidents and killed 8 people and injured dozens more. And I haven't got the number on how many dozens more were injured, but I was told by my Canadian friend it was over 120. But we'll see. Bear that in mind. Give me a chance to prove that. These attacks culminated with the Montreal Stock Exchange bombing in 1969 and the October crisis in 1970, which most people remember. And I was a teenage boy, and I remember watching Pierre Trudeau on national television, and we'll get to that in a second. It started in October 1970. I believe it was October 11th. They kidnapped British Trade Commissioner James Cross. During the negotiations, the Quebec Labour Minister Pierre Laporte was kidnapped and murdered by a cell of the FLQ. But he wasn't murdered right away. Public outcry and a federal crackdown subsequently ended the crisis and resulted in drastic loss of support for the FLQ, with a small number of FLQ supporters and members being granted refuge in Cuba, granted by Fidel Castro. That piece of you-know-what. But the FLQ members practiced propaganda of the deed and issued declarations that called for socialist insurrection against oppressors identified with Anglo-Saxon imperialism, the overthrow of the Quebec government, the independence of Quebec from Canada, and the establishment of a French-speaking, quote, worker society, end quote, in Quebec. It gained the support of many left-leaning students, teachers, and academics up to 1970, who engaged in public strikes and solidarity with the FLQ during the October crisis. After the kidnapping of Cross, nearly 1,000 students at the Université de Montréal signed a petition supporting the FLQ manifesto. This public support largely ended after the group announced they had executed Laporte in a public communique that ended with the insult of the victim. The KGB, the old Russia's CIA, which had established contact with the FLQ before 1970, later forged documents to portray them as a CIA false flag operation, a story that gained limited traction among academic sources before declassified Soviet archives released the ruse. In other words, when after Chernobyl in the Soviet Union in 1986 or 87, whatever year it was, Russia just broke up and they stopped being themselves. They just couldn't afford it anymore. Then that's when the majority of this ruse was discovered. By the early 1980s, most of the imprisoned FLQ members had been paroled or released. I don't understand how that's happened. Maybe that's a different video for a different day. I'm not going to go through all these waves. I mean, there are several waves from March 7th, 1963, Molotov cocktails, bombings, shootings, 7 incidents on here. There was a second wave, and there was a third wave of attacks, and the majority of the money that they made with these to rob banks. Mostly Canadian banks, but I understand he actually robbed a couple of American banks too. Now, fast forward to on October 5th, 1970, when they kidnapped the British James Richard Cross, the British Trade Commissioner, as he was leaving home from work. Shortly afterwards, on October 10th, the Chenier cell, there were like 7 different cells as FLQ, kidnapped the Minister of Labor and Vice Premier of Quebec, Pierre Laporte. Laporte was coming from a meeting with others where they had discussed the demands of the FLQ. I mean, he was going to negotiate with these people. In the following days, FLQ leaders held meetings to increase public support for the cause. Consequently, a general strike involving students, teachers, and professors, resulted in the closure of most French-language secondary and post-secondary academic institutions. On 15th October, more than 3,000 students attended a protest rally in favor of the FLQ. I'm going to read this one more time. On the 15th of October, 1970, more than 3,000 students attended a protest rally in favor of the FLQ. Really? Maybe we should raise the voting age to 30. Well, anyway, demonstrations of public support influenced subsequent government actions. But after having held Laporte for a week, FLQ killed Laporte. On 17th October, callers to a radio station announced that Laporte had been murdered and divulged the location of a map which led to the discovery of his body. And the guy on the phone told me it was in the trunk of a car. Typical terrorism. Now we know how the Palestinians copied this guy, putting the positives in the trunk. Well, anyway, I'm not going to list the list of the demands here, and I'm going to close this part out. I'll put the link below, and you can look it up for yourself. I just found the clip Pierre Trudeau when he was telling the TV reporter, and you could tell the reporter was liberal, like our liberal mainstream media here in the United States of America. And he said, "You know what?" He said, "Just watch me." And I remember that. I don't remember where I was at, but I remember watching it on television. I thought, "Wow, this guy's got Gucci's. He's got nads, and he's going to fight these people. He's going to fight these terrorists."
In the kind of society that you live in. There's a lot of bleeding hearts around who just don't like to see people with helmets and guns. All I can say is go on and bleed. But it's more important to keep law and order in the society than to be worried about weak-kneed people who don't like the looks of a
at any cost? At any cost? How far would you go with that? How far would you extend that?
Just watch me.
I didn't at the time. I understand the severity of all the attacks. I mean, I don't even think that was really publicized too much back in the day. You got to remember, mainstream media had a little different controls. They didn't want certain information to get out, give people ideas. But in modern social media, the way the world has evolved since then, it'd be impossible to stop the information getting out. But anyway, having said that, I'm going to read a couple comments on this video I got here. He's only got 256 comments, and the top comment from 6 years ago, Pauline Triage, quote, "Just watch me," unquote, is a soundbite everybody remembers, but I personally prefer, quote, "All I can say is go on and bleed," end of quote, myself. And I kind of remember that too. He said that first. Could use some of this energy in Ottawa and Windsor right about now. Say the line, Justin. But why am I making this video? Because Pierre Trudeau did what he had to do to stop these horrible terrorists. And in my opinion, after doing a look from both angles, all sides, and I gave it an objective, fair chance, that in my opinion, Pierre Trudeau was 100% correct in invoking the War Measures Act. The only time it's been done in peacetime. This has been evolved, and it's called some kind of Emergency Powers Act that Justin Trudeau invoked with 11th of February 4 days ago. A brilliant statement. Leadership has gone by the wayside. We live in an era of frivolity where the real issues are rarely raised and never resolved. That's a brilliant statement right there. Next comment. Greatest Prime Minister Canada ever had. No one is ever going to be able to convince me otherwise. Why the hell don't we have more liberals like this? Okay. And I understand he was part of the Liberal Party. He did some things that I wouldn't agree with. he opened up the immigration to the Caribbean nations, and there was tremendous backlash. But he stated this case. He said, we need immigration. Because Canada had the problem before Japan did about the lack of population growth. You got to remember, Canada is almost 2 times the size of the United States, but it doesn't have 8%. It barely has 8% of the population. The United States currently has 335 million legal citizens and 65 million illegal citizens. The nation of Canada barely has like 37 million. And I'm not sure how many illegals they may have. It might be 1 million tops. It's not even 10% of what we have. A lot of the land, I've been to Canada 3 times. I've never been to northern Canada. I've had relatives and friends, and my daughter was up there once. It's hard to build up there with the ice and snow and the tundra. Anyway, what most folks don't remember, that he was very arrogant, brash, articulate, gave the finger to the press a few times, brilliant, and could deliver a speech. Generally, the press wasn't easy on him, hence the finger, but he was my favorite. He opened the door for Caribbeans with a trade to immigrate to Canada back in the day. Oh, I forgot to tell you, Canada used to have the toughest immigration policies for a century. Canada's gone completely woke, worse than the United States in my opinion. But we'll get to that in either this video or another day. In the longer part of the clip, you can tell the reporter was trolling him, which is why he responded like this. I kind of remember some of that, but I was 12 or 13 years old. But I do remember some of that. Pat McNamara writes 3 years ago, a far cry from today's Trudeau. Mr. Trenchkolotix writes, boss mode activated. Jason White writes, badassery right there. Felix On writes, isn't this the equivalent of, quote, hold my beer, end quote, YouTube comments? Shell TV 100 writes, for the first time in Canadian history, there was a shooting that happened in the Parliament. If you think Harper is going to do the same thing as what Trudeau did in 1970, Canadians have never seen such an awful terrorist attack like the mailbox bombings that occurred until 1970. And as for the Parliament building in Ottawa, that shooting was the worst thing to happen in the Parliament since it got burned in the fire, except for the library. So I don't know what that's about. So bear with me on that. But apparently there was a shooting in the Parliament. Just like there's been shootings at the Wadsworth building in Capitol Hill, the mainstream media and the Democrats have something to kind of just close their eyes, hope that everybody missed it. But guess what? I was right there and I caught it. There was a Puerto Rican nationalist group that shot up the Capitol because they wanted Puerto Rico to be independent. They wanted to get their comrades out of jail, whatever. Kind of a mess like the FLQ above that we talked about today in this video. And Bill Clinton wound up pardoning them, but that was sick in itself. But before all that, okay, there has been attacks on the Capitol building, but no mention from Kamala Harris. BWO22 writes 3 years ago, and now we have Justin Trudeau, someone who can't give an honest answer to what these comments, most of them are years ago. Okay, this video didn't get up here until 2011. This video has been up for 12 years. John Schuchman writes 1 year ago, Pierre was a great and charismatic leader, a brilliant man with many accomplishments. He notably stood up to the U.S. concerning Vietnam and Cuba. He invited tens of thousands of American war resistors to come to Canada, and he did. Okay, but I have a personal story in 1968 that I want to share with you about my father, who was in Halifax, Nova Scotia. He made friends with Castro and established a strong relationship with the country at a time when the U.S. was trying to hurt or kill Castro. Some mixture of fact in there. It's kind of a false flag. There's also a camp that I've read about, and because I've studied the JFK assassination so much extensively, I'm actually starting to see evidence that people wanted Castro to thrive in Cuba. They needed the Cold War to continue, and if Castro was eliminated and Cuba gets returned back to Batista can't come back. Fulgencio Batista, he took 55 trunk suitcases of 20s, 50s, and $100 bills over $100 million in cash, and he had 3 airplanes to get out. So Castro made a deal with him: you take your money and get the hell out of here. And it was American money; it wasn't pesos, the Cuban pesos. So it was useless to Castro at the time. In retrospect, Castro regretted that in his memoirs. But I know a lot more than the average person, so I'm going to pat myself on the back a little bit. But I'm here to tell you that there are some Americans and some Canadians that wanted Castro to thrive, and they had a little island. It was the island of Ireland that it's the biggest island. It's the most diverse island. It has everything. It's got all 4 seasons too, by the way. And I've been there once. We got stuck on a cruise ship, had to go on the far western end, west of Havana, and we weren't allowed to go off the docks. But they waved to us, and a couple of them had American flags. That's a different video for a different day. I'm starting to ramble here now. So let me start over. I'm going to read John Chuckman's post again, and I'll delete the other part. Quote, 1 year ago, quote, Pierre was a great and charismatic leader, a brilliant man with many accomplishments. He notably stood up to the U.S. concerning Vietnam and Cuba. He invited tens of thousands of American war resistors to come to Canada. He made friends with Castro and established a strong relationship with the country at a time the U.S. was trying to hurt or kill Castro, or so we were led to believe. His son, Justin, 36 years after his father left office, has been a great disappointment, following the U.S. line in almost all foreign affairs and displaying little independence of thought. The apple does indeed sometimes fall far from the tree, and that's the purpose of this video. They're trying to link this Justin Trudeau, what he did with the Emergencies Power Act, to stop the truckers' payments and get the Canadian military, Rocky Mountain Police, to arrest the truckers and start getting tow trucks or whatever they do to move these trucks off these highways in between Canada and the United States. The two incidents between the October 1970 crisis and what's going on with the trucker convoy, the Freedom Convoy today, they are two totally opposite situations. You couldn't get no more black and white, no more yin and yang, no more anti-negative and positive universes. Completely different story. Now, I already said earlier in the video that I felt that after doing my research, that the then Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, was 100% correct. Matter of fact, I'm surprised he took as long as he did. He didn't seem like a tyrannical type person when I watched all the film clips in there, and I've talked to people from Canada.
War Measures Act to be invoked, suspending civil rights and allowing arrests and detentions without charges.
The powers include the right to search and arrest without warrant, to detain suspected persons without the necessity of laying specific charges immediately, and to detain persons without bail. These are strong powers, and I find them as distasteful as I am sure you do.
Hundreds of people were rounded up and held in just the first day.
I have an eBay business on my eBay channel. Everybody knows about my eBay business. 20% of my business is from Canada. I get 20% of my comic books and my U.S. coins from Canada. You know, they have a culture that they're taught to take care of things, and despite the low population that they've had, they learn to take care of things. They're more practical. Tucker Carlson is the only one who's covered it. And Jesse Waters covered it in the Five. The Gutfeld is Five. They've done a good job covering it. They've had some great statements. Even Jordan Peterson came out and gave them a vote of confidence, but also gave them a vote of caution. And you know what? I have to say, these truckers have been so disciplined. I mean, I'm surprised the guy didn't chase it. Hey, you're taking my gas. And the way the video was presenting, I thought the guy was going to jump the policeman and take his gas back, but he didn't. He let it go. Now, and I'm going to close this video. I want to ask you a fair question. How in the hell could any country, Canada, United States, Mexico, Cuba, how can they take the GoFundMe money and steal from these truckers? I understand that the GoFundMe turned woke, and now their true colors have been exposed. I kind of saw something a couple years ago about Trump. One of their sponsors called Trump a rapist, and of course I got on there and they blocked me. Now I can never use GoFundMe, whatever. And so I don't regret that because I'm never going to use them anyway. But there was a Christian site. Oh, Give, Send, Go. Give, Send, Go. Oh, and by the way, there was a professional hacker that destroyed the Give, Send, Go page and said, "Well, blah, blah, you trucker, blah, blah." You know, so you know that these young hackers, these black hat hackers, you know they're all Marxists. They've been taught at these K-12 schools, and they get taught in colleges by these Marxist professors. That's going to be hard to overcome. That's a serious problem for this country.
Bleeding hearts around who just don't like to see people with helmets and guns. All I can say is go on and bleed. But it's more important to keep law and order in the society than to be worried about weak-kneed people who don't like the looks of a
At any cost? At any cost? How far would you go with that? How far would you extend that?
Just watch me.